Good morning, it's Tuesday, the 28th of April. I'm Marit Gwyn and this is Europe Today, your daily dose of news and analysis broadcast live here from Brussels. Coming up on today's show, Iran has offered to reopen the Strait of Hormuz if the US lifts its blockade of Iranian ports, according to officials. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has rejected the offer as unacceptable. Meanwhile, the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has said the US is being humiliated in talks with Iran. We'll bring you the latest. And with the US and Iran locked in a standoff over the Strait of Hormuz, the European Union is facing a deepening energy shock with potentially far-reaching economic consequences. We look at whether the political response has matched the scale of the crisis. And China has publicly criticised EU plans to shield homegrown European industries with the so-called European preference in public procurement, saying it's discriminatory and vowing countermeasures. We ask what it could mean for the relationship between Beijing and Brussels. But first, this morning, against a backdrop of rising energy prices and warnings of stagflation, French President Emmanuel Macron has renewed calls for Eurobonds, which is joint European debt issued by all 27 EU member states. But in Brussels, the proposal is being met with scepticism. For more, we can turn now to our Europe editor, Maria Tadeo, who joins me in the studio. Good morning, Maria. Tell us first, why is the French president proposing this now?
Well, Merit, this is something that it's not necessarily new coming from Emmanuel Macron, because he's always argued for this idea of a strategic autonomy for Europe. So this is a European Union that is able to operate independently in a global scenario, of course, in which you're seeing deep competition coming both from China, but increasingly the United States of America. He's always argued that in order to finance this autonomy, you will need joint debt. No single country in the European Union can do it alone. And obviously, we're talking about billions in investments. So it does make sense, and it matches his thinking that he's now put forward for many years. Nonetheless, the timing now, this is all looking into the June summit in which European leaders will gather in Brussels. Emmanuel Macron has already said for months that decisions, fundamental decisions when it comes to the European economy will have to be made. So they are trying to revamp the idea looking into this gathering. At the same time, you're seeing, and you just alluded to this at the start of the show, this is a very complex geopolitical but also macroeconomic scenario for the EU. The financing costs, obviously, when you look at interest rates, which are going up, the cost of energy related to the situation in the Middle East, this adds a sense of urgency when it comes to the French, but not just because a growing number of countries, including Greece, by the way, but also the Spanish, they have all argued when it comes to not just new debt, but also the repayment of debt that was previously issued, especially at the time of the pandemic. These payments should be delayed beyond 2026 because the urgency now means that the focus should not be on paying off debt, but actually investing in the future of Europe. What we should note, however, is that the German line, and that is crucial, has not really changed. They continue to say they're not in favor of more debt. The German Chancellor insists that the problem in Europe is really about productivity when it comes to its companies, but it's beginning now to lay out the scene for deep fundamental economic matters, which are also going to include, of course, the European budget and another round potentially of simplification, so meaning cutting off more red tape. I spoke with the economic commissioner last week, and he said expect more measures in that sense.
And Brussels is also warning, Maria, that even if there's a peace in Iran tomorrow, there will be potentially very deep economic consequences. So what has the response really been like from them?
Yeah, you're seeing now a growing number of European leaders, including the German Chancellor, repeat that there is no exit plan from the U.S. It's not clear how this war is going to end. And at this stage, you have the Strait of Hormuz with the many ramifications that it has for the global energy market, which has been completely rattled by this war. It's under the grip of an Iranian regime that is totally volatile. We don't know who's actually leading these negotiations. And we're also seeing that the talks are not really making progress. So for the Europeans, the language has now really changed from it's a shock to now you are dealing with a crisis. Last week, the European Commission put forward measures, but it did not move the needle. There is a pressure still from the capitals that the Commission needs to do more. There's also criticism that some of the big measures, which could include, counting out some of the energy costs from fiscal deficits and debt, that should be tweaked, those parameters. There's also been now calls about suspending some of the green rules rules and legislations. There's been calls also about state aid that can work for some countries, but not others which do not have the financial capacity to pay for it. So you're still increasingly seeing capitals are asking for more. I was at an economic forum over the weekend. The response that I got from the industry is that this is much more severe than the language that you hear from the institutions, and that they do want to see more measures, which for the time being have not come.
Okay, Maria Tadeo, thank you so much for that analysis for us. Now, moving on, EU lawmakers are gathering in Strasbourg this week with a raft of issues on their agenda. For more, we can cross over now to the European Parliament in Strasbourg and to our correspondent, Vincenzo Genovese, who's there for us. Good morning, Vincenzo. Great to see you. Give us a sense, what can we expect from the Parliament today?
Good morning, Maret. Good morning from Strasbourg. The European Parliament is voting today at noon on a report about rape legislation in the EU. The resolution calls on the European Commission to establish a common definition of rape, which should be valid across all the 27 member states, and essentially says that any form of sex without consent should be considered as rape, which is not the case today all across the EU. So why is this important? I'll put that question to Abir Al-Salani, a Swedish MEP who has worked on the file. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
What's the key point of this vote?
Well, it comes as a result of a failure from the previous mandate when we discussed the gender-based violence directive, and where we fail actually in delivering this kind of legislation to women. And it comes at a very important timing, not only because of the backlash on gender equality issues globally, but also specifically in Europe, but also because of all these scandals that have been surrounding this topic, from the case of Madame Pilico in France to the so-called rape academy, where you drug women, where the partners drug women, they rape them and they streamed it online. So the violence has evolved against women. Sexual violence in Europe has evolved.
Because nowadays the definition of rape is, in some member states, is linked to violence.
Exactly, and many of these, let me just focus a little bit on the member states, where they actually were the ones pressuring us, the previous mandate, not to go through with the consent-based legislation. And finally, they are waking up, and now it is actually on them to also push the Commission so we can have this legislative proposal. Because when you do this, when you do not choose the side of women in this, the victims, then you're choosing actually the side of the rapist. You're already chosen a side, you're not neutral.
What about the Parliament? All the political groups agree on this resolution? Because I see that some criticism from the far-right parties.
Well, unfortunately not. Can you imagine in 2026, they are saying, these far-right parties, the Patriots and the ESN, they are still saying that are women properly dressed? Was she too drunk? What did she do to provoke a rape? Still, they are blaming the woman, the victim, for the rape. And I think that they should be utterly ashamed when they cannot, even in this very volatile situation, they cannot choose the side of the victim.
Let's turn to another topic, because tomorrow there is a key debate on the Middle East crisis. What should be done on this crisis?
Well, it's not a crisis, it's a war ongoing where actual people, real people, humans like you and me are dying. And they are paying a price for us watching the global order being renegotiated in real time. And what we should have done is we should have been much more clear, much more early in our reactions. We should have brought the Iranian opposition to facilitate their democratic shift, but killing people and calling it a war for democracy, that is just ugly.
But are you in favor of a direct involvement of the European countries as suggested by President Trump?
Never, never in a war that is a crime against international law. We are better than that. Europeans, EU, we are better than this. If we don't protect the international law, then nobody will.
Okay. Thank you very much, and we will follow, of course, this debate and all the votes here in the European Parliament in Strasbourg on Euronews and Euronews.com. Maren.
Okay, Vincenzo, thank you so much, and thank you to your guest there, MEP Abir Al-Salani. Now, we're continuing now with the Middle East, where uncertainty, of course, still hangs over the future of talks between the US and Iran. For more, we can now cross over to Doha and to our correspondent, Laila Humaira, who's standing by for us. Laila, great to see you again. Tell us, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi met President Putin in Moscow yesterday. What was the outcome?
A very good morning to you as well, Marit. Well, yeah, it seems like Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was very pleased with his visit to Russia and his meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, hailing the strategic partnership between Tehran and the Kremlin. Now, after these talks, Araghchi also said that the U.S. had offered a new round of talks and negotiations. But on the U.S. side, though, latest reports from several U.S. media outlets are saying that Trump is again unhappy with the peace proposal that Iran had put forth after reviewing it with his security team, which begs the question, what is going to happen next? Now, Washington has been very clear that its red lines remain, that Iran cannot be enriching uranium and it cannot possess any capabilities to develop a nuclear weapons program. Now, we've had reaction from Europe as well, with the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying that the U.S. is being humiliated by Iranian leadership simply because it doesn't have a clear exit strategy for the war. So that's where we stand, Mari. It seems like one step forward, but maybe, possibly 2 steps back as well.
And Laila, briefly, both sides still locked in a standoff over the Strait of Hormuz, and it's still having quite a deep impact on the markets.
That's right. Now, the Strait of Hormuz situation has escalated into the top rooms of the United Nations, with the UN Security Council calling for an urgent and unconditional reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, the disruptions and hostilities in the critical maritime shipping trade has sent shockwaves to energy markets and supply chains as well, with oil prices trading at a 3-week high, with Brent crude prices at a critical $108 a barrel level. Now, there's also been latest inflation and consumer confidence data coming out from across Europe, which indicates worries and concerns that weaker or slower consumption is ahead of us, and possibly also a weaker or slowing GDP growth in the coming months. And that's also in the summer months, concerns of lower or shortage of jet fuel, and that would be a concern for flights to be grounded, and the tourism also bracing for impact as well.
Okay, Laila Humaira in Doha for us. Thank you so much for that update. Now we're moving on now. The European Commission has defended its Made in Europe push by stating the bloc is one of the most open markets in the world. It came after China slammed the EU's attempt to supercharge local industry. For more, we're joined by our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins. Good morning, Angela. Great to have you. Tell us first about this clash that's played out quite publicly between Brussels and Beijing.
Good morning, Mared. So it all started on Monday when a spokesperson from China's Commerce Ministry came out with a statement blasting the EU for their Industrial Acceleration Act. This is exactly what you're talking about. That Made in EU push came out in March, aiming to help support the EU wean off some of those major superpowers when it comes to manufacturing, such as China. We know that 200,000 jobs in the EU have been wiped out since 2024. These are in the automotive and energy industries. So this big push by the EU wants to help permitting as well as preferencing public procurement when it comes to those made in EU products. Now, China came out with that statement stating that this could violate World Trade Organization principles and it could hurt foreign investment, and that countermeasures could follow if the EU plows through. Now, Brussels has not stayed silent on the matter, and neither has the French Minister Delegate for Europe, who wrote on social media platform X, "We will not back down. Like the United States and China, Europe will support its industrial players." A spokesperson from the European Commission also took to the podium at a public press conference on Monday. This is what they had to say in response to those statements.
It's, of course, also about reciprocity. I mean, we've been quite clear that the goal of one of the objectives of the proposal is that we are one of the most open markets in the world, and we have the largest free trade agreement network worldwide. And so we also expect that openness to be mutual.
And Angela, this is actually the second statement criticising the EU coming from Beijing in recent days. Can we now say that these tensions are really escalating?
Yeah, absolutely, Mara. This is the second statement. We know that Beijing came out on Friday criticising the EU for that 20th sanctions package against Russia for that country's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. They imposed restrictive measures for at least 7 defence companies from the EU exporting their defensive products into China. This is in response to at least 24 companies that the EU put on their own sanctions list. These are companies allegedly in China that are helping Russia and Belarus circumvent those EU sanctions measures, as well as for allegedly producing those dual-use technologies that Russia is employing on the battlefield. So what is clear from both of these public spats is that the tensions are escalating between these superpowers, and it is also playing out on the global markets.
Indeed. Angela, thank you so much for that update and that analysis for us. Now we're moving on now to something a little bit different, because it's a big week in football with the first legs of the Champions League semi-finals kicking off tonight. But this isn't just a clash of teams. The 4 semi-finalists also represent how club ownership in Europe is shifting, as Jakub Janus explains.
Tonight, the Champions League semi-finals kick off. But if you expect real drama only on the pitch, look closer at the accounts. And while everyone watches the 22 players chase a ball, your reporter is following the money to witness a high-stakes clash between entirely different versions of how to build a global sporting empire. So let's investigate that together. First, today we have Paris Saint-Germain. PSG has changed football to become a global lifestyle brand. And at the very center is Nasser Al-Khalifi, the most prominent face of European petrodollar investment. And while he wasn't the first to invest, he has become its most influential ambassador. And they face Bayern Munich, the gold standard of the German democratic model. Under the 50+1 rule, club members still hold the majority of voting rights, legally preventing any single billionaire from seizing control. And although its own executives suggested scrapping the rule last month, for now Bayern remains a machine built on fiscal efficiency rather than individual ego, underpinned by its industrial alliance of Adidas, Audi and Allianz. And tomorrow it is a battle of American investment strategies. Until 1990s, Atletico de Madrid was the people's club, but they have undergone a total corporate makeover. And following last month's majority takeover by US private equity firm Apollo Sports Capital, and with home games at the Riyadh Air Metropolitano, they have become a curious hybrid of Wall Street capital and Saudi partnership. And they face Arsenal, the crown jewel of Stan Kroenke's real estate empire. And Kroenke, who is the largest private landowner in the US, does not just buy players, he buys postcodes. And his business model treats the stadium as an anchor for massive urban development. So whether you prefer Qatari luxury, German democracy, or American private equity, today and tomorrow have something for every corporate strategist. Oh yes, and I'm told there might be some football played as well.
Jakub Janus reporting there. But that brings today's programme to an end. Thank you so much for tuning in. Remember, you can send us your tips, your questions and your feedback. Email us on europetoday@euronews.com. We do love hearing from you. But we'll be back tomorrow with more exclusive interviews, including from the European Parliament in Strasbourg. Make sure to tune in then. See you.